Hi, I'm Mike,
And I'm Brad.
and this is
NF
Nfgeeks. All right. So, for this installment, Brad and I are actually going to talk about the Myers-Briggs itself and personality theory. And this is another simultaneous debate we've been having, along with the mystical debate, because it actually leads into this debate that we've been having continuously now for 2 weeks too, and it's been a very fascinating, um, right, discussion.
It's
Okay.
been great.
All right, so because it relates to whether or not people can have mystical experiences. So again, this is more the world according to Mike. But let me see if I can describe this, and then Brad will deconstruct it as he does. And that is that what I've said is that the personality types, whether we're just talking about NF, or the specific ones like ENFP or INTP, are like wedges. Okay, they're like personality wedges. And what I mean by that is that over time they go out like this infinitely. You know, you sort of the wedge can go and expand, um, ever expanding, and as you travel along the wave of the wedge, I should say, you have more complex and personality traits and more complex experiences and more wisdom, but you never actually leave the boundaries. You never go outside the boundaries. So for myself as an ENFP, I was certainly an ENFP as a child. I can, when I look back. So I was way down the beginning of this wedge, and now I'm, 40 years later or more, is that I exist in a much more complex way within that wedge and have a wider range of experiences and talents and interests, but I'm still within the ENFP wedge. I'm still not outside of it. My boundaries are wider, but I never actually go outside ENFP. So that's my theory for all the types. And so, Brad, I've said this to you a bunch of times, and so what's your take?
All right. This statement started off this entire debate to begin with.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you remember? Do you remember the statement that I said to you?
Yes.
All right. Think of the most powerful supercomputer of modern times.
Or just hypothetically.
Hypothetically.
The hypothetical computer.
Now multiply that by 100.
Sure.
If not 1,000.
Sure.
You'll have the human mind.
Sure. Or even less. I mean, depending on how powerful the computers are. You might just need 20. But right, you eventually arrive at a machine that's processing on the level of a brain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so, to try to label different functions of this supercomputer that we only use about 10% of, but we don't know what parts we're using. We could be using all the same parts all the time, or we could be jumping to different levels because the brain is a three-dimensional model. And this is actually one of the things I want to study when I go to school for neuroscience. Is
neuroscience. That's not NT. That's great. Okay, so
and so I find that trying to label the brain with these various letters is just trying to narrow somebody's personality options. Like I go through periods where I dress like an SJ. I wear a lot of camo or like a lot of olive drab, and I wear a lot of army shirts. And I go through periods where I dress like an NF.
You think this is NF?
No, this is very antique.
Yeah, it is, exactly.
But I wear a lot of neon colors when I do that. And I dress up like a piece of fruit stripe gum.
Yeah. Or a neon sign, a piece of technology glowing.
And so I just think it's very limiting to try to narrow human beings down to just these certain personality types, and not saying that we can have SJ tendencies or SP tendencies.
That's actually a common criticism. So let me admit, I've heard that as a common criticism about Myers-Briggs at all. Some people hate the Myers-Briggs because they feel they're being labeled. And I've had that said.
My postmodern side cries when I feel I'm
okay, does it actually cry, though?
No. It emits oil.
Oh, that's wonderful. That sparks come out.
Sparks.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so let me respond to that. So I actually was thinking about this, because I didn't think about what Brad says all the time. And so I have a new response about this. And I think that the reason why I talk about limitations and the limitations of personality types has to do with my age. And also perhaps your position also has to do with your age. So, and that's not a criticism, that's not ageism. I mean, different ages aren't necessarily hierarchically superior. You know, different ages, just like the different personality types has its own validity. This is a very perceiving thing to say. Ages and the view that you have at a certain age also has its own validity. Your view of the world at kindergarten has its own validity within that context. So I find that when you're in your early 20s, you're trying to find your strengths and what are your strengths and how you act on those strengths. And the idea that you have limitations or faults or weaknesses is kind of hard to hear because it kind of taps into all sorts of old, you know, getting beat up over shit from high school, middle school. So you're more interested in trying to find your strengths and how to apply them. Whereas by the time you're 40 or in your early 40s, like myself, you're more conscious of your limitations and where am I actually and what cannot do, because you've been burned a bunch of times by the time you're 40 in life, in terms of love, like a good NF, or in terms of career, in terms of intellectual capacity. So I find that I'm more into what are the limitations of the Myers-Briggs because of where I am in development in terms of limitation, in terms of thinking of what are the limitations. So all right, so first of all, comment on that as a good INTP.
Right. I completely agree with that. I can see what you're talking about, and like I can agree that for somebody who's as young as I am, being labeled does bring us back to like the high school
nerd.
And there's
right.
Being afraid of being trapped in forms is, I think, natural to anyone who's young.
Sure.
And trying to wriggle our way out of it, and like I think that a whole Nietzsche thing where you redefine yourself, and that's kind of where I'm at right now, is trying to just redefine whatever I don't like about myself.
Right, in terms of identity, you know.
I have no issue with being an MT. I can see that I have many MT qualities, but trying to limit my infinite self sometimes gets scary.
Well, remember, it's infinite with boundaries, like the universe. It's or you know, it's still infinite. Like this wedge can go out infinitely, or it doesn't stop. There's no like eventual.
But does it? You said it changes with age, though. It goes out with age.
It goes out with age, but it never leaves.
But
the
so
zone.
So even if you're 20, you can be up here. But
No, 20 would be like this.
All right.
And then 30, 40, 50, 60. You know what I mean? It keeps expanding.
All right.
You know.
But what's it expanding into? Are you having more options of the personality types, or
no? You're having a more complex, a more wise version of yourself. Of within. This is my theory of within the wedge.
I was always pondering what you meant by the wedge, though. Like,
okay, the wedge is expanding out into the, because you're going to love this as an INTP robot trying to understand mysticism, but the wedge is expanding out into into the collective consciousness.
All right.
Okay, so those are wedges, and NF and NT and SP, those are also wedges, but it's expanding out into that collective whole. Okay, that exists, that collective whole of human consciousness. So if we took all the 4 temperaments and all the 16 types, that would be the totality of human consciousness.
All right.
Okay, and so within that consciousness, we each have a wedge, or you can think 3-dimensionally. I talk about it as a cone. You know, that even gives you a wider range of within the space, the consciousness space. So you're in this. So this cone is taking place within human consciousness. There's something Hegelian a little bit going on here too.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I admit. Okay, but I don't think you can go outside of it, and I think you can make attempts at it, but I think those are failures. This is the world according to Mike again. So, for example, camouflage. Okay, this has more to do with the NT's lack of fashion sense, I feel, because SJs only wear camouflage when they're actually in the military, they don't wear camouflage like out. The SJs only wear it when it's an absolute duty necessity.
I have some really cool camouflage, though.
Yeah, of course, right, like a good NT.
Purple, black, and white.
That's
a cool combination.
It is. I remember those shirts. You wear those shirts, but an SJ would never wear that. They would never wear a purple. You know, they'd never
What
wear
would,
like
what
a
would an
purple.
SJ wear out?
Bland, like tan khakis, or if they're wearing camouflage, it's that crazy gray beige camouflage that they actually wear in like Iraq and Afghanistan, and that's because they're actually going to Iraq or Afghanistan. They wouldn't wear it out.
My SJ friend, that's what he wears. He usually wears like black spandex shirt with tan khakis.
Yeah,
That's his
khakis.
typical.
Right.
He's either shaving his head or growing his hair out and like dyeing it white.
That's interesting.
He's the goth one that he was goth when he was younger.
Wow,
Now
that's
he's in the
I know.
military.
All right, so what do you think about then? So go ahead, debate it as you do. What do you think about what's your
going
issue?
out?
Yes.
So all right, I just pictured the model as we were just
Right, and
talking
it's a
about.
model.
Yeah.
I mean,
I got the model where it could be like I guess kind of like a square type thing where it goes out. With
sure.
The four types.
Sure.
Like that.
Yep.
I don't know what that would be. I've never been good at geometry.
Well, I don't know what a 16-sided three-dimensional object is. I'll have to look that up. But right, it would be.
Oh, you're picturing it as three-dimensional?
Well, it could be three-dimensional because that gives a wider space. Like if it's a cone, that gives even a more complex area to work in.
I was picturing like a triangle.
Yes,
And
that's
you
the
were saying-
easiest. Yes, that's because that's a simpler metaphor than a cone. You know, the wedge. You're expanding wedge. All right, but you have difficulties
all right,
with this.
So, I have ascribed to Timothy Leary, who most people find him that wackadoo of the
Yes.
60s. What do you think about that paper I wrote about him?
Oh, I thought it was great, and I also
Um,
think Timothy Leary's probably an NT. I don't think he's an NF.
He could be an N.
You think
He
so?
was, well,
I think the acid made him sound NF, but his reasoning for it sounded very NT.
Well, the thing about him was he was into being able to, you can still find it online now on Facebook. It's a Facebook application. He created
Really?
one of the very first computer programs ever, and it was called Mind Mirror. I used it, but it's very very limited compared to the original one that was on a floppy disk. To tell you how old it was on a floppy disk. And he was a psychologist, but he was into personality theory and being able to recreate whoever you wanted to be. To be able to, if you wanted, because that's what the mind mirror is all about. It's like an open-ended Myers-Briggs, where you answer a series of questions, and then you look at how you answered those questions, and then kind of revamp your responses and turn that into who you are next time. And I enjoy that. I've gone through several different. I've been an NF in my life. I was in my younger years, very sensitive and very empathetic. And then, kind of as I went on, I spent a lot of time with my friend who's the NT, and we spent most of our time just studying and talking and like reading, and so it kind of turned me into an NT. So I think you can, if you run with a certain type of people, you kind of learn your behaviors from them. It's kind of how I act, is monkey see, monkey do.
All right, that's an interesting debate because I'm always on the bubble about that because I don't know. People sometimes talk about having a different personality type at a different point in their life. And now I don't have that experience, so let me be honest.
Well,
I don't have that experience, so I'm usually skeptical of that.
When I was younger, I not only did I want to be a geologist. All right, there's rocks. They're everywhere. They're free. Like,
Yeah.
I was fascinated by this, and so my thing was quartz. I wanted those white polished quartz,
Yeah.
and I called them God rocks.
Oh, that's interesting. Let's see. That's attempting for the mysticism. I also find, because we've got to finish up, I do find that INTPs are the most sensitive of the NTs. I'll say that, or the ones that come close, because they're trying to be human. They're trying hard as robots to be human, so they actually achieve a certain level of sensitivity that's absent from some of the other types, like the INTJ, which is just, they got nothing. All right, so that's it. So Brad, thank you very much for that conversation.
Thank you.
All right, great.
All right.